EU welcomes the reopening of the Rafah crossing between Gaza and Egypt, but authorities are blocking humanitarian aid from entering. Will the EU take a stance on these human rights breaches? Welcome to Brussels, My Love, the podcast, with me, Maeve McMahon. This week we zoom in on Gaza. 4 months since the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, we take a closer look at Trump's 20-point peace plan and examine his so-called board of peace that he showed off in Davos, and it's leaving Brussels in a bit of a bind. Let's meet our guests this week. Martin Konitsky from the European Middle East Project, a Brussels-based NGO promoting just and fact-based EU policy on Israel and Palestine. Martin, welcome. And did I pronounce your name right?
You pronounce it almost perfectly.
Can you do the honours, please?
Konechny is the right
Martin Konechny, lovely to have you with us for the first time here on Brussels, My Love, the podcast. We're also joined by Lisa Musial, Head of EU Affairs at the International Crisis Group. You're welcome.
Thank you for having me.
And a regular here on the podcast, Stefan Krobe, our political correspondent from Euronews. Welcome.
Thank you, Maeve. Always good to be here. I'm great. Thank you.
Good. Thank you so much for joining us. I know it's been an intense start to the year when it comes to the news. And I feel like one story that's just really dropped off everyone's minds is a little bit Gaza. So I really wanted to put the attention on the situation, especially given this week we saw Palestinians starting to enter the Rafah border crossing between the Gaza Strip and Egypt after it reopened for the first time for people since May 2024. And of course, this reopening was meant to come earlier during the first phase of Trump's ceasefire plan. But Israel was, of course, blocking it until the return of the body of the last Israel hostage in Gaza, which of course happened last week. So let's get your take, perhaps, Martin, first on this. I mean, it's coming as a relief to Palestinians that this has happened. They see it as a lifeline to the world, but still a lot of frustration because only a small number of people can come through and goods. What is your view here?
Yes, it is a small positive step forward, but it's also extremely limited. The number of people who are being let in and let out is very small. It was agreed, I think, at 50, but in practice, actually, the numbers are even lower. The Israelis are not allowing even the 50 who are kind of on pre-agreed lists. And even if you had 50 per day, it would take a huge amount of time, more than a year, to even just allow all the patients who need urgent treatment abroad because the hospitals in Gaza are largely destroyed and damaged to get them out and get that urgent treatment. But I think, the opening of the crossing is also just a very small element in the larger picture, because while this happened, just a few days earlier on Saturday, more than 30 people were killed. This is the backdrop, and it's hard to call this situation a ceasefire.
It's hard to call the situation a ceasefire. Indeed, a very fragile ceasefire it is. You mentioned the casualties as well. And of course, Lisa, we've seen around 20,000 sick and wounded Palestinians waiting to leave Gaza for treatment. That's according to the World Health Organization. Tell us more about the situation on the ground.
Yeah, indeed. It's important to say that obviously that ceasefire has halted the Israeli offensive on Gaza City, which has been very important. But at the same time, Gaza is still in limbo. I think Israeli strikes have killed more than 500 Palestinians. Within that period of time, more than 10,000 Palestinians are still detained by the Israeli authorities. And obviously life in Gaza is extremely difficult. Most Palestinians are still living in tents, exposed to the weather, to the winter temperatures, to heavy rains, with no sewage, no schools, very limited medical facilities. And aid is also still trickling in, only a bit more than before the ceasefire, but it's still not enough for the population.
Stefan, what role can the EU be playing here? We know that an EU delegation is on the ground at the crossing, but are they doing much? That's the question.
Well, it's not a delegation. It's the EU Border Assistant Mission, EUBAM, that is supervising the crossing. And that mission is basically kind of border law enforcement type of group. This mission has been established in 2005 to provide a neutral third party presence, and was suspended in 2007 when Gaza was taken over by Hamas. And it was redeployed a year ago, but then was suspended again because Israel breached the ceasefire. And ever since, it has been sort of on standby. That is the most active part that Europe is playing and the most visible part. Now, what can the EU do? Diplomatically, as you know, there is no consensus when it comes to the Middle East and Israel and the Palestinians within the EU. Does the EU have serious leverage on what Israel is doing, for example? I rather doubt it, but it's at least a symbol. And the whole Rafah reopening was rather symbolic, as Martin has outlined. It's a sign that Europe is still present on the ground, and that's why it's important.
Would you agree with that, Martin?
Yes, I think that's correct. I would just say that I think the EU does have leverage with Israel. It is the largest trading partner for Israel. And we saw last year that the EU started a discussion about using this leverage, and that was centered on the EU-Israel Association Agreement, where there was a process which led to a proposal by Ursula von der Leyen and the Commission to suspend the Association Agreement or its trade provisions, which is most of the agreement. So that was an effort to apply the EU leverage.
But as you say, it was a proposal. It was talk. And as long as you have Germany not participating or blocking all these things, there's nothing serious coming out of the EU.
It undermines the EU's leverage.
Yeah, I think the leverage is technically there, but the EU collectively has not really managed to really use it or apply it very effectively. But it's actually still, Europeans often repeat that this measure is still on the table, and that is an attempt to keep some kind of leverage with Israel.
I think we need to take a step back here, because I don't think that the future of Gaza will be decided in Brussels or in any European capital. Rafah reopening is sort of the end of the first phase of the whole peace plan and the beginning of the second. And it should be a time of, it should be a positive and optimistic time, but it's not. Why? Because it took much longer to get here than initially thought. Israel still controls half of Gaza, whereas the large majority of the people in Gaza live in the part that is not held by Israel. Hamas isn't disarmed yet, which is a major obstacle, and the international security force that is designed to take over is nowhere to be seen, and countries haven't committed because they don't want to disarm Hamas, because if Hamas doesn't want to be disarmed, technically means you have to fight them, and no country wants to play that role. So there are a lot of questions, and unfortunately a peace process is not moving forward.
And this fragile ceasefire, Martin, what has it achieved and what has it not achieved in your view?
Well, it has achieved a reduction of the extreme numbers of casualties that were in Gaza during the Israeli war, which is widely considered to be a genocide over those 2 years. Also, it has improved to an extent the provision of aid to the Gazans, but it has not achieved full ceasefire. The killings are still ongoing. It has not achieved sufficient provision of aid. It has not brought about reconstruction. The plan has not moved forward. But I think we also have to question the plan itself. That, I think, is the key point. It's a fundamentally unbalanced and flawed plan. And I think the problems are actually rooted there.
Maybe to add, I think this is specifically why this second phase of the implementation of the plan will be so difficult, because the plan did not really set out the sequencing of decommissioning of weapons of Hamas and the withdrawal of Israel, and in which sequence that would happen. So even though it was the plan was vague so that it could be agreed by everyone. This will be really tricky now to work out how that next phase can happen, and in what sequencing, and what is possible from the Hamas side, what is acceptable from Israel, and how to navigate this. And this is where obviously the US also will be critical, and the leverage the US will use and the bandwidth the US has to follow through. And it's true, the weakness of the plan is definitely there and will make this phase extremely difficult.
Well, my colleague Shona Murray actually spoke to a former Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Olmert, earlier in the week. I'd like to listen to him in just a minute, but first let's bring in the voice of a young Israeli activist who set up Standing Together. That's a grassroots movement that mobilises Jewish and Palestinian citizens of Israel against the occupation. Let's take a listen to Itamar Avneri.
we're coming to Brussels and we're traveling all around Europe. Our work is on the ground in Israel, but we do recognize that the international community has a role to play in Gaza and in the West Bank and the whole Israel-Palestine situation. What we need to achieve is a real Israeli-Palestinian peace of two states in a shared land with open borders, with the recognition that we all belong to this land. So when the ceasefire agreement was signed, we were relieved and we were happy because there are less bombings and the hostages, the Israeli hostages, came back home, and that's a good thing. But we don't really know what's going to happen next. We don't really know if the war is going to come back.
That's Itamar Avnari there, a founding member of Standing Together. And along with his Palestinian founder, he'll be spending his weekend here in Brussels speaking to locals. And we understand that Netanyahu is putting pressure on him to actually close this cooperation that he's set up, this Standing Together. So very brave young man speaking out there. Your thoughts?
Well, I would focus maybe on one thing he said, which was that beyond the Gaza ceasefire, we need a political solution for Israel and Palestine. And that, I think, is the fundamental flaw in the Trump plan. It's not just the issue of disarmament, or the problem is that disarmament of Hamas has been delinked from a wider political solution. And we know lessons from other conflicts around the world, like in Northern Ireland, is that disarmament works if it is linked to a political solution that addresses the underlying grievances. That's how it also worked in Northern Ireland, not as a precondition, but as part of the process, and in a way subsequent to the peace that was achieved. Here we take disarmament and we put it forward as the first condition for everything, for even reconstruction of Gaza, and we defer the political solution, which is mentioned in extremely vague terms. And even the return of the Palestinian Authority to Gaza is put under so many conditions that it looks like it's not supposed to happen under the plan. So these are the fundamental flaws in the plan that I see. Similar, in my view, to the fundamental flaws which everybody did see in the plan for Ukraine, the first 28-point plan that came from the same people in the Trump administration. At the time, the Europeans pushed back very forcefully and came up with their counterplan. Here on Gaza, the response is fundamentally different, and the European stance is basically, how can we contribute to this plan, rather than pushing back.
Yeah, I think it's very valid, and it brings us also to the question around the West Bank and the linkages between Gaza and the West Bank, because ultimately it's about sort of the viability of a Palestinian state and how that is possible, and what the political prospects for the future for Palestinians is. In the West Bank, Israel is continuing also the de facto annexation at a very worrying pace, and that also is obviously factors into this kind of wider political horizon for Palestinians.
And actually, the former Israeli PM, Ehud Olmert, he spoke to Shona Murray earlier this week on Euronews and called it actually ethnic cleansing, what was happening there in the West Bank. We can take a listen to him right now.
In the West Bank, the situation is entirely different, because there Israel is in a total control, and no one can blame anyone else but the Israelis that live in the West Bank and the government that supports them, who are perpetrating the hostilities inhuman against non-involved Palestinians. This is something that comes close to an attempt to make ethnic cleansing. And I speak up everywhere I can with the loudest voice I have in order to condemn it.
Ehud Olmert there. Now, I'd like to talk about Trump's Board of Peace that was established, of course, to promote peacekeeping around the world. The board was proposed in September 2025 and then established formally on the sidelines of the World Economic Forum there in Davos. Before I hear your views, let's just bring in President Trump.
This is the greatest board ever assembled. Everybody wants to be on it. But yeah, I have some controversial people on it, but these are people that get the job done. These are people that have tremendous influence. And if I put all babies on the board, there wouldn't be very much. So he was invited. He's accepted. Many people have accepted.
So there's President Trump. That was his view on the board. Lisa, what's the view here from Brussels on this so-called Board of Peace?
Yeah, so I think it's quite interesting. Obviously, the UN Security Council Resolution 28003 has given authority to the creation of this Board of Peace for the implementation of the peace plan in Gaza. But what Trump has done is sort of a bait and switch, and then created something that actually the charter for the Board of Peace does not even mention Gaza. And there's obviously very many layers, so everyone is trying to work out what are these different layers, but there is this layer of sort of heads of state joining, and that has a sort of a more global outline, but there's no UN authorization for this, and nobody really knows what this will exactly look like then. And then there's other executive boards, one other executive board mainly with US officials, and then one specifically for Gaza. So there's a whole setup there. And the questions are, what parts of this Board of Peace are really going to focus on Gaza, and what will their role be exactly? And what is sort of that broader element? And I think for Europeans, there's a bit, there has been this dilemma that obviously it also comes at the moment where transatlantic relations were under extreme strain when we were in Davos. That was the moment where also the Greenland crisis was at its peak. So on the one hand, Europeans were keen to keep relations with the US and also play a role in some shape or form in Gaza. But at the same time, the Board of Peace obviously goes a lot against European principles when it comes to sort of international law. So for the moment, we have only, I think, 2 member states that have joined the Board of Peace, that kind of international level, which are Hungary and then Bulgaria, because of the specific role that Hungarian diplomat Mladenov has. So other Europeans have not joined. Von der Leyen, I think, also had said that she assesses the invitation that she got.
Well, I think when von der Leyen says, well, we have to assess this is a polite way of saying it's a joke.
Yeah.
It's a joke. I mean, and you hear the soundbite that you played, you hear the piano music in the background. It's that serious. It sounds like it was recorded in a nightclub or something. Nothing of what Trump said here is true or serious. And that's the problem with all his initiatives. He says, we have a deal on Greenland, on Ukraine, but nobody knows what's behind it. We don't know anything. And in fact, there is nothing. And this is a vehicle here that is totally Trump-centered. It has a group of a motley collection of more or less democratic leaders who have no clue what they're getting into. And Trump is, till the end of his days, it's not that the US president as an institution is part of this group. It's Trump, Donald Trump personally. And he calls all the shot. He sets the agenda. He decides who is going to be a member, what members can be fired, what the issues are, what problems they are supposed to solve. It has, it is... Everything that has been said is totally true, but we need to find out what happens to this board after Trump leaves office. And my guess is not much.
It might disappear. What about your view, Martin, here on this? Because, of course, we have the UN.
I agree it's a joke, but it's a bad joke, and it's a very dangerous joke because it is meant to actually replace the UN, and Trump has been pretty clear about that. So I think it is important for the Europeans not to buy into this. As Lisa said, only Hungary and Bulgaria from the EU member states joined. By the way, when it comes to Bulgaria, I don't know to what extent it has to do with Mladenov, because it has also been reported that the Bulgarian prime minister, who is leaving, was pushed into this by Bulgarian politician Peevski, who is widely known as an oligarch who was sanctioned by the Biden administration and the UK, and is very keen on getting removed from the US sanction list under Trump. So he pushed the Bulgarian prime minister to join this board. I think it is completely surreal, very dangerous. And I would also point out that the European leaders broadly did not join. But for example, Friedrich Merz and Giorgia Meloni, they were more like, we would like to join, but our constitution does not allow it. So only some member states were very clear that this is actually not right and that we need to defend the UN.
Yes, and maybe to add, It's very serious, definitely. It will not replace the UN Security Council. I think that is not realistic, but it is adding to the fragmentation of the international system that we are already seeing. But it's also one thing to take serious is that the Gulf states and the regional states around Gaza and Israel have joined the board collectively, but with a statement that says also that they are joining but I remain committed to the implementation of the 20-point peace plan. So linked really to Gaza, but they did see it as an important step to join in their own calculations to be part of a solution in Gaza. So that's also something to take seriously.
Yes, I think the craziness of all this is not only at the kind of top level with the Board of Peace that we saw, but there was another presentation in Davos by Jared Kushner of the more specific Gaza plan. And that was also completely surreal in a different way because he showed this PowerPoint full of these hypermodern skyscrapers in Gaza, which is completely detached from the reality on the ground in Gaza. And it shows that this administration cannot be trusted in having any kind of realistic understanding or plan for Gaza. And that, I think, has to be the starting point, that we are working in this very terrible reality when the most powerful country in the world is deluded about the situation.
Let us know what you think. Please write to us here at brusselsmylove@euronews.com. But that does bring this podcast edition to an end. We can thank very much Martin, Lisa and Stefan for being our guests for this episode. And also thank you to our sound engineer, Georgios Levaditis, for his help in the studio. And to Alicia Carnivali, Brussels My Love assistant producer, and Noah Schumann for their help, making sure that everything works nicely behind the scenes. If you're not already, you can listen to Brussels My Love on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us on euronews.com or on the Euronews YouTube channel. And if you like what you hear, please write us a review and, of course, spread the word about Brussels My Love, the podcast. Thanks so much for listening. See you next time.